today we are, I have the pleasure of hearing from David Branscombe, who's a Microsoft technical architect. One of the things that we focus a lot on here in Tech Talk is trying to bring different areas of subject to you so you can learn a little bit more. A lot of the things that we've been focusing on the security side have been really on the Office 365 platform itself, kind of getting that SaaS app and doing what we need there. Now we're going to change directions a little bit more and talk a little bit more on the Azure piece. One thing that in building either line of business applications that you've created yourself, or maybe you've bought a third-party application, and one of the questions is it secure? And one thing around the security perspective is that there's multiple layers, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm going to put a better a filter on for the firewall, or just provide identity security. It's multiple layers. And here in this example, we're going to learn a little bit more on how do you get Kali Linux to run in Azure, which is pretty exciting stuff to get these security tools that runs in the cloud and potentially could allow you to do pen testing or penetration testing in your cloud environment. So that might be some of the stories we go through. So really that's the next thing that we really want to focus on here is that next level of security and testing in the cloud. So, David, I'll hand it off over to you, and love to see how all this works.
All right, thanks. So, what we're going to do is talk about how you can run Kali Linux on Azure. This is a new image that is able to be deployed through the Azure Marketplace. So, very briefly, what we're going to talk about is this set of questions. So what is Kali Linux? How do you provision it on Azure? What can you do with it, and what are you allowed to do with it in Azure? And then we'll also walk through a demo of just a simple demonstration of something that you could do with Kali Linux. So very briefly, Kali Linux is a pen testing platform. So it's based on Debian Linux, and it contains something like 600 different open source penetration testing tools for a variety of different purposes, whether you're doing web attacks or password attacks or email attacks, whatever it is. They've pretty much got a tool for just about anything. It is maintained and built by an organization called Offensive Security. They do training on Kali Linux, and they do certification for Kali Linux, as well as offensive security practitioners as well. Now the thing to keep in mind is you can actually download and install the ISO for Kali Linux on a machine of your choosing. So you could create a laptop. You can actually use it on a USB stick, right? So you can download this and install it on your own standalone machines. But like I said, we now have the ability to provision it in Azure, which may be useful if you want to do pen testing against your machines in Azure, or if you want to do some of the more advanced features of Kali Linux against your Azure environment. So the question is, how do you provision this Kali Linux machine on Azure? Because if you just go into your Azure portal and try to provision the machine, you're not going to see it. So you actually have to get the Kali Linux image from the Azure Marketplace. And so when you do, you will see that the little Get It Now button. You'll click on that, and when that happens, you'll get this prompt that asks you which accounts you want to use when you acquire apps on the Azure Marketplace. You type in your work account or Microsoft account, your MSN or Hotmail or Outlook account, and sign in. And at that point, you'll be able to provision the Kali Linux image into your Azure instance or your Azure subscription. So what it looks like is this. You would provision it just like you would with any other virtual machine, any Windows machine or other Linux machine. Just set it up, and it runs just the same as any others. One of the things that you should notice in the screenshot there is that the installation defaults are that the only way to administer or access the image by default is through SSH. So you have to SSH into the box using a password, or more securely using SSH keys. Once it's been provisioned, you don't get a GUI interface, but I'll talk about how you can actually set up a GUI interface very easily. You'll also need to get the latest updates for your Kali Linux instance, which would include things like the latest packages for different drivers and just your standard operating system updates, as well as bug fixes, and then there might be some updates to the actual tools that are built into the platform itself. So that's where we're talking about the installation defaults being SSH and port 22. Oh, and the usage instructions there, the last sentence there shows you the command that you would need to type to go out and get the updates, and I show this on another slide in a second here. So how do you connect to your machine using SSH? So if you're not familiar with how to make this connection, once you've provisioned the machine in your Azure portal, you'll be able to see, as you do on the top left, what your public IP address is, 40.85.183.6 in my instance. Download and install the PuTTY tool, which allows you to SSH into the box, and there's a screenshot of that in the picture below. You would just type in your host name or the IP address, make sure that the port is 22 and that the little radio button for SSH is selected, and click open. That will then give you a prompt for username and credentials, and that will get you into the interface for your box. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that by default, when you log in, so if you look at the screenshot here, I'm logged into my Kali box. I'm logged in as Kali admin. I've already entered my password, but the problem is the account you define when you provision the box by default does not have root permissions, which means you can't install updates and you can't modify the install, which is something that you're probably going to want to do. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is set a root password. To do that, I've got the command there. It's a sudo password space root, and then define a password, and then you can log in as the root account using the su root command, and then you'll have root access to the machine, which is equivalent to admin on Windows. So now you're logged in as root. So if you look at the screenshot below, you see in red that I'm logged in as root at Kali-001, which is the name of my machine. Now I want to go out and get the updates to my Kali Linux distribution. So I type in the command there at the top, apt update apt dist-upgrade. It'll ask me to confirm that I want to do the updates. You type yes, and the machine that I provisioned I think on Monday of this week, so it was a fairly recent image, and as soon as I spun it up, I did the updates, and the updates ran for probably 20 minutes. So it takes a little while to get all these updates, so just make sure you're provisioning your time accordingly. So now your machine is updated, but you still have to administer everything with SSH, and that'll work because most of the tools in the Kali Linux install don't need a GUI. They are command line tools, but there are a few that are GUI based, and so you might want to create the ability to go remote desktop into your Kali Linux box and have a GUI as well. So in order to, first of all, get the remote desktop, there's two steps that are required. The first is to actually enable the RDP components or install the RDP components on your Kali Linux box, which are the first 4 commands there listed on starting with the apt-get and ending with the service xrdp restart. So xrdp is the Linux version of RDP. So this enables you to remote desktop into your Kali instance. The second piece is that you need to enable the RDP port in Azure so that you can actually get to your Kali Linux box. So when you initially set it up, you enabled SSH, but when you enable the RDP, you have to enable port 3389. In the screenshot that I have there, I've enabled source any, destination any, but of course you may want to lock that down a little bit tighter. I was just doing it for simplicity's sake. And that's the line where RDP is enabled on my Linux box. All right, so the other part is getting a GUI interface. This is fairly easy. So the command that I have listed there, apt-get install -f gdm3, enables or installs the GNOME Desktop Manager, which is one of a couple different GUI interfaces that you can use for Linux, and it gives you the interface that I show you there in the screenshot. So that should give you just about anything that you need to manage it in a way similar to how you would manage your typical Windows box. And now let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So here is my Windows Azure portal. Here's my Kali Linux box. You'll notice I've got a different IP address than the one that was shown there in the slides. Obviously, my IP address is dynamic. I talked about the networking, so here's where you would define the networking. And once that pops up, you'll see that I have port 3389, TCP, any, allow, and this is an inbound port rule, not outbound. So just make sure you get that right. You can change the sizing of your machine if you want to. So by default, it's not a standard A4 VM. I upped it up just to make it run a little bit faster, but this isn't dramatically different than what the default is. So to log in, you just do connect. Make sure you are connecting with RDP. You download the RDP file, which is just the same way you would with a Windows box. And once you log in, this is the interface that you're going to get. So this is the my Kali Linux box. And what I'm going to do is just very quickly show you. These are what come by default in the Kali Linux box. Like I said, there are a number of different tools that are all built in here, some for information gathering and reconnaissance, some for doing vulnerability analysis, things like Nmap, and there's tools for hacking voice over IP, reverse engineering, wireless attacks, password attacks, and so forth. A very easy attack to set up is in your social engineering tools. So let's walk through that. So if we go through the social engineering toolkit, open it up, and like I said before, a lot of these tools are command line based tools or non-GUI tools. This is just going through a terminal session. So if you wanted to manage it only through SSH, you could. But what I'm going to do here is a very simple attack. So I'm going to do a social engineering attack. So I just type 1. Then the next thing that I want to do is do this with website attack vectors, which is 2. Then I want to do a credential harvesting attack, which is 3. Then I'm going to do a site cloning, which is 2. All right, so the idea behind this is I'm going to replicate or clone a live website, and theoretically what you could do is send the link to your Kali Linux box to a target. They would click on the link, enter their credentials, and you would be able to capture their credentials. So let's see what that actually looks like. So what this says is, where do you want the information to go back to during the course of this attack? So the IP address for my machine, it says 10.0.16.4, so let's try that, but that's not the same as the one that was showing on the Azure portal, so this may not work. We'll try it though. And then what is the website that I want to clone? So I'm going to try Facebook. Okay, so just for comparison's sake, what I'm going to do is open up Facebook so you can see what the actual Facebook page looks like today. All right, so I'm going to replicate that web page. So I type in http www.facebook.com, hit enter. There's this instruction that says you might need to copy these files into a different location, and if you just say yes. All right, so now it's ready to go. So now essentially what's being said here is the Facebook page is now being replicated back to 10.0.0.16.4. Now what I want to do real quick is just confirm that that is my actual IP address before I go further. 10.0.0.16.4. Okay, so I'm good. So now what I want to do is go back to the web page. Remember, this is the actual Facebook. Now let's do a local instance of 10.0.16.4 and port 80. Now, if this is working correctly, what this should show me is a local instance of the Facebook page. And there it is. It shows me it's not identical, but it's using the same forms-based authentication, and to a casual user, it would look the same. So I'm going to put a fake address in here and a very, very secure password and log in. Now, what's interesting, when I logged in, it didn't let me log in, but it did take me back to the real Facebook page. So a user who might then start to look at the page would then see, oh, okay, I was logged into the right place. I'll try to log in, and then when they log in that time, it'll work. But let's see what's happening on the other end. So my Kali Linux box has captured some information. Okay, so it has captured my login attempt. And now what I'm going to do is, as it says here, hit Control-C to generate a report. So I will hit Control-C. And notice it says that there is a file that has been exported to root SET reports. So that's where I'm going to go. All right, so I go to my file system. I go to root.set. All right, and 12/6, that's today's date. So this should be the report of what happened with this attack. So here's the report generator. And if I go down through here, what it says is log into facebook.com. It gives me a bunch of information about what happened during that the connection there. But the important part is down here somewhere. Showing me mouse movements. And here we go. So here is where it captured my username and password. So if this had been a real attack, I would now have login credentials for the user that I was attacking. So Very, very easy attack to set up, very easy attack to implement. So that's just one of the tools that you can use with Kali Linux. Like I said, there are many, many tools. Some of them take a little bit more time, and maybe it's fun to play with them in a testing environment to get some practice on it. But that's an example of some things you can do. I'm not going to go into sharing the screen in any particular mode, but here's the thing to keep in mind. So what kind of pen tests are allowed by Microsoft? If you go to the link down there at the bottom of that page or the bottom of that slide, you'll see that Microsoft does not require any pre-approval to conduct penetration testing against Azure resources. Now, you can let us know that you're doing that if you like to, using the testing notification form, but that is no longer a requirement. Notice, however, that this is related specifically to Azure. It doesn't apply to any other Microsoft Cloud service. What are the kinds of pen tests that we allow in Azure? The standard pen tests that you can perform are the ones that would uncover the OWASP vulnerabilities, fuzz testing, and port scanning. The one thing that you're not allowed to do is perform any kind of denial of service attack, because theoretically that would be has the potential to initiate or create a denial of service for other Azure tenants. So we don't allow that. All right. Any questions, or I can just hand it back over to Conrad. That was just a quick overview of Kali Linux on Azure. Hope it's been useful.